So I was asked to come talk about universal, I can't even say it, universal primary education, UPE, and also to talk about sort of my work and what's really compelling and interesting to me. And as I thought about what to talk about, truth in advertising, I don't really do work directly on UPE, but I do a lot of work in Uganda where there is UPE. And I decided that what I would do is not directly talk so much about UPE, although I'll use it as a frame. And I'm not really going to talk about the thing that most compels me in my work, because that's a digital literacy project linking kids in Uganda and other countries and here. And if you want to know about that, you can ask me afterwards, but it's a little less relevant. But I am going to talk about some of the work that I do in schools in Uganda, and in some sense try to give you a framing for UPE and also try to give you an on-the-ground picture of what it actually looks like as education is happening in a particular school in Uganda. So, the Millennial Development Goal, achieve universal primary education. So I just want to do a little outtake from the 2010 report on the Millennial Development Goals, where they say that for this one, the target is to ensure that by 2015, children everywhere, boys and girls alike, will be able to complete a full course of primary schooling. But they also say hope dims for universal education by 2015, even as poor countries make tremendous strides. And that has to do with that kids would sort of have to be starting now to be anywhere by 2015, and that it's not happening at rates that they can see that this is going to happen. So sub-Saharan Africa has the lowest net enrollment ratios, which you can see, and what you see is you see growth, and that is not Uganda, that is sub-Saharan Africa, but not nearly there. So they say that, again, this is sub-Saharan Africa, not Uganda specific, but in more than half of sub-Saharan African countries, more than 30% of primary school children drop out before completion. That's before completion of primary school. There's a gender gap, and they're saying that in that 99 to 2008 period of time, the share of girls dropped just in that window. Rural children are twice as likely to be out of school, and that poverty is the biggest obstacle. That all comes from the United Nations MDG report. That yellow thing is Uganda. And it's small, it's central, and the one thing that I do want to say about Uganda is that when you talk about rural education, most of Uganda is rural. There's Kampala, it's big. There's a few other relatively big places, Entebbe, but mostly it's very small villages, and it's very rural, and it's very poor. So, Uganda's population. 24.2 million in 2002, 32 million in 2010. About half of those are under the age of 15. And the number of primary school pupils is projected to increase from 7.5 million in 2007 to 18.4 million in 2037. So that gives you some sense of the numbers that we're looking at. And this is, you see where I got the information, in case you thought I was making it up. Now, education in Uganda, policy and otherwise, at the government level is part of their Ministry of Sports and Education, which is something that I actually find pretty interesting. But, and then within the Ministry of Education, or Sports and Education, they have put together sort of a sub-board that's the National Assessment of Progress in Education, and these folks put out a report every year, and so much of the information that you'll see now comes from their 2010 report, and they go out and they look at the assessments in actually 3rd and 6th grade for primary all over the country, and then they compile a report of what's going on for education. I can get into more detail if anybody wants it. But the point of this quote, which is from their 2010 report, the advent of universal primary education in 1997 and universal secondary education in 2007, and they are the first African country actually to have universal secondary education, was a response to a number of commitments, and one is the World Conference on Education for All, but they say the MDGs, the Millennial they didn't say that, they said the Millennial Development Goals, is the other commitment to ensure that children everywhere, boys and girls alike, will be able to complete a full course of primary schooling. And I included that because you can see the directive force that the goals actually do have, and not only are they directly saying that they drew from that to do this, they're using the identical language. They just cribbed the language from the United Nations and stuck in the report. I want to show you quickly just some stuff from the policy, and I'm showing it to you in part because they actually have some pretty cool stuff in here. This is the 1997 policy itself, and the policy objectives are, well, let me just pull a few of them. Transforming society in a fundamental and positive way. Providing minimum facilities and resources to enable children to enter and remain in school and complete the primary cycle. Making, this is an important one which we'll come back to, making basic education accessible and relevant to students' needs. Making it equitable to eliminate disparities and inequalities. Ensure education's affordable, I have coffee too. Eradicate illiteracy, provide basic skills and knowledge. That's pretty good stuff. There's a lot of thought in here, and there's a lot of fairly progressive, good, I don't know, discourse going on here, wrong word. It breaks down by stakeholders, and it's much more extensive than this. Again, I just pulled a few to say what people's responsibilities are, and this is part of what we'll talk about. So the teachers have to prepare schemes of work and lesson plans, provide all-around education and exemplary leadership, be fully prepared for engaging pupils in learning, involve and inform parents, RE pupils programs in progress, and full participation in staff meetings, community work, and participation with parents in school-related functions. So just to get to at least part of the punchline, what you'll see is that with all this good rhetoric, good ideas, and hearts in the right place and everything else, they're asking for things that really can't happen on the ground, at least not now. So this is what they're asking of teachers. This is what they're asking of pupils. I love that the pupils have to portray a good image of the school. That's my personal favorite. But they're asking them to complete their homework, participate in community work in addition to going to school. The school day is about 6:30 in the morning till 6 at night. Participate in co-curricular programs, and contribute to the maintenance of hygiene and a healthy environment. It's much longer than this. I'm just culling to give you an idea of the scope. Parents, ensure discipline for improvement of behavior. Provide exercise books, pens and pencils, uniforms. You might guess that given the poverty, that's not so doable. Actively participate in parents, teachers, associations, and in community mobilization activities. There's some really good thought and really good ideas here. Universal primary education is free in that the parents do not technically have to pay school fees, which they had to prior. Even though it started in '97, it was not made compulsory until 2008. The enrollment in primary schools, rose from 2.5 million in '96 to 5.3 million in '97, and then when it became compulsory the first year to 7.5 million in 2008. It's bigger than that now. The average classroom learner ratios are 1 to 100, which right there poses some difficulties. So I'm going to talk about a particular elementary school, which shall remain nameless. I was going to give it a pseudonym, and I just couldn't think of one, so it's just going to remain nameless. And this is just an idea. You'll see that these kids, I don't have like one of those little pointer things. A lot of them actually are in uniform. If you look at the boys and the shirts and the girls and the dresses and whatever, some are, some aren't. But this is just to give you a visual of what this school looks like. Again, you can see the building, the cement building back behind the kids. This is the school property, and this building right here in the front is actually the cookhouse. It's where the gruel and the pocho and beans for lunch and stuff are made, at least for now. This is to show you, at least in part, the inside of a classroom. And what you will see is bare walls. You'll see a lot of students crammed together. You will see students holding up pens, and that is because a couple weeks before I was there, the Village Health Project, which some of you, I hope, know about, I know some of you know about, were at the school and they gave them pens, and they actually didn't give the kids the pens until I was there so that the kids would have new pens and could hold them up. But what you will see is that each kid has a pen and each kid has a notebook. That's what's on the I'm pointing. It's not doing you any good, but it's on the table here. And basically, there are no texts. There are no books. There are no resources, not just here, but in general in public schools, as this is in Uganda. And so there's no resources. This school now has roughly 750 kids. It's grades kindergarten through primary 7, that's the end of primary school in Uganda. And it's roughly the same grade equivalent and age equivalent as our 7th grade. It's fairly equivalent to here. More than actually 60% of the kids have HIV/AIDS affected families, one or both parents or siblings and or siblings. Many of the kids also are HIV/AIDS positive, but we don't have numbers on that, so we don't, I have no idea what the percentage is. The kids, as I say, come to school at 6:30 in the morning, the younger ones. The youngest leave a little earlier, but the 4th, 5th, 6th graders, they stay till quite late. Many, I think most of them don't eat during the day because even though they do serve gruel at break, the parents have to pay for it, and the parents can't pay for it. And the typical class size is 1 to 60. Some are a bit bigger, some a bit smaller. This is not a very good picture, mostly because it's a screenshot. But what it's meant to show is if you see the kids in the front and a couple of the others do have the gruel, this is break time, and the others don't. This is to show you, Jake, how am I doing on time? Okay, left. Yeah, okay. This is to show you that one of the things that's done that I just think is really cool, there are curricula, there are texts per grade in English and science and social studies that are made by Ugandan companies. There aren't Western texts. There's 2 Ugandan companies that make the texts. And I mean, in some sense, it's a little bit irrelevant because the kids don't have these texts. They can't afford them. You don't see them. I saw these at the university bookstore, not in the kids' hands, but the teachers have seen the texts, and so they do inform what they teach and how they teach what they teach. And I don't know, I guess you can see this. What I love about this, this is the English book 4. So it's 3rd, 4th grade, and what I love is the way that it's just totally responsive to the kids' lives and what they know. So they're frying cassava chips and making groundnut paste and coming from the borehole, right? And this, just a real quick, the next one, you can see a lot of it is grammar and drill. What she doing, is he, she. But Zaina is washing plates and cups. Is she peeling matoke? No, she's not. Or maybe, no, she's not. So it is very culturally relevant. This is actually the wall of the school. It took me forever to figure, it took my son to figure out, that actually is supposed to say with piety, as in piety. And it's just not spelled like pi, never mind. I kept looking at it going, what is that? But again, they're using the wall as text, which is an interesting thing, and they're making it very relevant to the major issues in kids' lives and making those connections. And I think that that's an interesting and an important thing. I don't have much time for this. This is a lesson. I wanted to give you a typical idea of a lesson. They were doing a lesson that was very typical, and actually the best lesson I saw in the school that day, where the teacher was made it about a garage and car fixing in a garage, and she brought in a pair of overalls and a screwdriver. And the short version is she writes these words on the board, she reads down them, and when she gets to screwdriver, she holds it up. And when she gets to mechanic, she holds up the overall. But she doesn't define them. It's not contextualized, nothing. She reads down, she reads one at a time, and the kids repeat after her, and she gradually works up to where the kids can read down the list, and then the kids have to read up the list chorally, and then she calls on individual kids to read. Anyway, when all of that reading up and down and sideways of the list is done, the kids are told to take out their notebooks, they write down the words, they close the notebooks, put them away, and they move on to the next lesson. So that's what instruction looks like in these schools. There are 17 teachers, at least 3 of them are HIV/AIDS infected. The first time I was there, not now, 3 of them were pregnant, and in Uganda, if you are pregnant, you get benefits, and you get leave if you're married, but not if you're not, and they were not. And I can't even talk about teacher preparation. It's, they go to 2-year teacher colleges, but straight out of high school, so there's no general undergrad degree. This you can read. Here, only 60% of children who enter school complete primary. You'll remember those figures at the beginning. They said 30% didn't. Here it's 40. This is showing you, you have to realize that basic and inadequate are both inadequate, right? Anything lower than adequate is not adequate. These are numeracy skills for the sixth graders. Look at the advanced in literacy for the 6th graders. I'm sorry, I'm back to the NAEP thing. This isn't this school. This is nationwide. I switched and I didn't tell you. 0.4% of boys and 0.5% of girls are at an advanced literacy rate. That is in part because they're asked to be literate in English and they don't come to school speaking English. And the teachers may not have a great grasp of English either, so that's part of it, not all of it. And this is basically saying that those figures that you saw are both public and private schools, and if you disaggregated for the public schools, you'd see much lower figures. So, I'm going to finish on time. So, there has been attention paid to enrollment and getting kids in school, but it isn't enough. If you don't pay attention to the quality of education, teacher professional preparation, and other things like instructional resources, also teacher training and incentives, the teachers are paid $100 a month, which even there is barely subsistence, especially if they have to get housing and such. So you have all of these issues around education. You also, moving out a little bit, have many children, families, teachers with HIV, who are HIV/AIDS positive and they have other illnesses. If you're sick, if your mom's dying, if whatever, it's real hard to come to school and pay attention and learn. If you're poor, well, first of all, if you're poor and your parents can't get you your uniform and your pencils and your notebook, sometimes you're not allowed to come to school, or parents are shamed enough that they don't send their kids to school. If you're hungry, it's hard to concentrate, and this goes for the teachers as well as the kids. And there are huge inequities in terms of gender. Granted, in the things you saw, it didn't look like it, but that's because that's the girls who are still in school that are taking those tests. That's not all girls. There are huge class differences as attested to just by the difference between public and private school. There are status differences in tribal and language affiliations, huge, that have to do with what happens in access to school and what happens in school. There's the rural versus urban divide, so the kids in the other school that I work with who live in the foothills of the Rwenzori Mountains, there was never school there until 5 years ago. They couldn't go to school, and that's a whole other story that I don't have time for now. And disability was mentioned in the Millennial Goals. Kids who have disabilities in Uganda don't go to school because actually, even though school is now a right, it isn't really considered a right. It is considered not luxury, what's the word I want? But anyway, if a child has a disability, if there's anything that's going to impede learning, that spot goes to somebody else, both from the school's perspective, but especially from the families and community's perspective. So what I was hoping to do was just to, I actually am opening the floor to Nancy's presentation, but what I just meant to do was bring up issues that show why UPE is a necessary but not sufficient condition for education for kids, and that in this group in particular, where we can actually talk about the ways in which attention to health and attention to poverty and attention to so many of these issues, they have to go hand in hand with each other, and we have to look at a multifaceted approach if we really want sustainable change, and I was hoping to open it up to that sort of discussion. And that's it.